My wealthy client's plan was perfect. Frame me for theft, call the police, and watch me get arrested over a $200 dispute. But she overlooked one tiny detail: the unblinking eye of a bodycam, ready to expose her elaborate lie. The weight of the antique mahogany armoire was nothing compared to the weight of her stare. I could feel it on the back of my neck, a prickly heat that had been there for the last 3 hours. Her name was Caroline, and her house was less of a home and more of a museum to her own wealth. Marble floors gleamed, art with incomprehensible price tags hung on the walls, and the air smelled of lemon polish and quiet judgment. I was just the help, a pair of hands hired for the day to move this beast of a wardrobe from one cavernous room to another, without so much as breathing on her precious hardwood. "Careful with that," she'd said for the 10th time, her voice sharp and thin. "It's a family heirloom." "Yes, ma'am," I mumbled, sweat stinging my eyes. My partner, Dave, grunted from the other end. We finally settled the armoire against the far wall, perfectly centered between 2 tall windows. The job was done. It was a simple gig, quoted at $400 for the 2 of us. Hard work, but fair pay. Or so I thought. I wiped my brow with the back of my work glove and presented her with the invoice on my tablet. "That should be everything, ma'am. Total is $400, as quoted." She glanced at the screen, a flicker of something unpleasant crossing her face before being replaced by a serene, condescending smile. "The quote was for a professional job. I noticed a slight wobble when you set it down, and you took a 5-minute water break. I think 300 is more appropriate." I blinked. Dave, who usually handles the client-facing stuff, had to leave an hour ago for a family emergency, leaving me to collect payment. "Ma'am, with all due respect, the wobble is from your uneven floors, not us. We placed it securely, and the water break was included in the hourly estimate. 400 is the agreed-upon price." I tried to keep my voice steady. I needed that money. My rent was due, and this job was the difference between making it and facing my landlord's wrath. Caroline's smile tightened. "I don't think you're in a position to argue. 300. Cash. Take it or leave it." She gestured to an ornate side table near the entryway. On it sat a small, unsealed envelope. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a power play. She knew I was just a guy in a stained t-shirt, and she was, well, she was Caroline. "I'm sorry, but I can't do that," I said, my voice firmer this time. "The price is the price. We have a signed agreement." That was the wrong thing to say. The mask of civility dropped completely. Her eyes narrowed into icy slits. "You people are all the same, always trying to squeeze every last penny." She snatched her phone from the table. "Fine. You want to be difficult? Let's be difficult." Before I could even process what was happening, she was dialing 911. Her voice, suddenly filled with a theatrical, panicked tremor, filled the sterile silence of the room. "Yes, hello, I need the police. Right away. The man I hired, he's stealing from me. I had an envelope of cash on the table, $500 for a contractor, and he's refusing to leave. I think he took it." My blood ran cold. The envelope. The one she'd pointed to. It was a setup. A complete malicious setup to get out of paying me $200. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, as she gave the operator her address, shooting me a look of pure, triumphant venom. I could run, but that would make me look guilty. I was trapped. 2 police cruisers arrived in under 5 minutes. The first officer through the door was a tall, stern-looking man in his late 40s, his name tag reading Miller. Caroline immediately launched into a tearful, Oscar-worthy performance. "Oh, thank God you're here, officer. This man, I hired him to move furniture, and he tried to extort me. When I refused, he must have pocketed the cash I had sitting right here." She pointed a trembling finger at the table, then at me. Officer Miller's eyes landed on me, and I saw his expression harden. He didn't see a small business owner being scammed. He saw a grubby handyman and a wealthy, distressed homeowner. His mind was already made up. "Sir, put your hands where I can see them," he said, his voice a low growl. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding," I pleaded, my heart hammering against my ribs. She refused to pay the full price for the job, and when I insisted, she made this up. She's lying. Of course he'd say that. Caroline sobbed. "Check his pockets. Please, just get him out of my house." Miller took a step toward me, his hand drifting toward his hip. "We're going to have a little chat, you and I. Empty your pockets onto the coffee table. Now." His partner, a younger, quieter officer named Evans, stood back, observing, his bodycam's small green light, a tiny, indifferent star in the unfolding nightmare of my life. I knew I had nothing on me but my wallet with $27 and my car keys, but that didn't matter. It was my word against hers, and in this house, in this neighborhood, my word was worth nothing. I was going to be arrested. My business would be ruined. All because this woman didn't want to pay what she owed. As Miller reached for his cuffs, a smirk played on Caroline's lips. She had won. But then, Officer Evans took a step forward, his eyes fixed not on me, but on the side table near the entryway. "Hold on, Miller," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Before we do this, let's review the footage. All of it. Right from the moment you walked in the door." He tapped the device on his chest. "My camera's been rolling the whole time." Officer Miller's jaw tightened. He shot his younger partner a look that could curdle milk. "Evans, what are you talking about? We've got a victim and a suspect. It's open and shut. We don't need to sit here and watch movies." Caroline seized on his impatience. "Exactly. He's just trying to stall. Please, officer, I feel so unsafe with him in my house." But Evans didn't back down. He held Miller's gaze, his expression firm but respectful. "With all due respect, sir, something feels off. Procedure says we use all available tools. This is a tool." He tapped the body cam again, without breaking eye contact. The silent standoff lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an hour. I held my breath, my entire future hanging in the balance of this internal police department power struggle. Finally, with an exasperated sigh, Miller relented. "Fine. Make it quick. I'm not wasting my whole afternoon on this." A wave of relief so intense it almost made me dizzy washed over me. Evans pulled out a department-issued smartphone, and, after a few taps, a live feed from his camera appeared on the screen. He rewound it to the moment they stepped through the front door. He angled the phone so both Miller and I could see. Caroline craned her neck, a nervous energy suddenly buzzing around her. The footage was jarringly clear. It showed their entry into the grand foyer, the camera panning across the room as Evans assessed the scene. It showed me, standing awkwardly by the armoire, my face pale with shock. And it showed Caroline, already launching into her tearful tirade. "Okay, so what?" Miller grumbled, clearly unimpressed. "Just watch," Evans said quietly. He paused the video, then zoomed in on the ornate side table near the entryway, the very spot Caroline had pointed to in her frantic accusation. In the crystal-clear bodycam footage, the polished wood surface was bare. There was no envelope. "Ma'am," Evans said, his voice neutral, "you said the envelope with the $500 was sitting right here." Caroline's eyes widened. A flicker of genuine panic replaced the manufactured fear. "Well, yes, it was. I must have... In my panic, I must have knocked it over," she stammered, her eyes darting around the floor. "No," Evans said, his finger tracing a line on the screen. He replayed the footage in slow motion. As Caroline gestured wildly, pointing at me, her arm swept past a tall, slender vase on the far corner of the same table. For a split second, tucked behind the vase and completely hidden from a casual glance, you could see the edge of a white envelope, the one she had pointed out to me earlier. "You see, sir," Evans said to Miller. "It wasn't sitting out in the open. It was concealed." Miller grunted, looking from the phone to Caroline. His suspicion was finally starting to bubble to the surface. "So you were mistaken about where it was," he said to her, his tone less sympathetic now. "Yes, I was terrified. He was looming over me," she insisted, trying to regain control of the narrative. "The point is, he knew the money was there." "Is it $500, though?" Evans asked, his gaze fixed on the screen. He zoomed in again, pushing the phone's digital magnification to its limit. The unsealed flap of the envelope was slightly open. Through the gap, the corner of the topmost bill was visible. It had George Washington's face on it. And beneath it, another one. And another. The entire wad was made of single-dollar bills. A dead silence fell over the room. It was a prop. A cheap, theatrical prop designed to look like a thick stack of cash from a distance. She hadn't just lied. She had meticulously planned this entire charade. Carolyn went ashen. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked like a cornered animal. Miller stared at her, his face a granite mask of disbelief and dawning fury. He had been played, turned into a pawn in her petty, vindictive game. But that's not even the most disturbing part, Evans said, his voice dropping. He swiped back, rewinding the footage even further, to the seconds before they had knocked on the door. The camera was pointed at the house as they walked up the stone path. Through a large, pristine window to the left of the door, a massive gold-framed mirror hanging in the foyer was visible. Reflected in that mirror was Carolyn. She was still on the phone with the 911 dispatcher. But the look on her face wasn't fear. Her back was to the window, but the mirror showed her every feature. She was looking across the room at me, and she was smiling. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a cold, cruel, triumphant smirk. The smile of a predator that had its prey exactly where it wanted it. Miller saw it. The last shred of doubt in his eyes evaporated and was replaced by a cold, hard rage. He slowly raised his head, his gaze locking onto Carolyn. He wasn't looking at a victim anymore. He was looking at something else entirely. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and menacing, sending a chill down my spine. "You know, ma'am," he said, taking a deliberate step toward her, "this little performance of yours feels familiar. We have a file on complaints like this. Bogus complaints. You wouldn't happen to have had issues with a plumber last year, would you? A Mr. Henderson." Caroline's face, already pale, went completely white. She looked as if Miller had slapped her. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, shrinking back from his advance. The air in the room had shifted completely. I was no longer the suspect. I was a spectator to a train wreck I had somehow survived. "Don't you?" Miller's voice was dangerously soft. He turned his head slightly towards Evans. "Pull up the Henderson file." Evans was already tapping away on his phone, his face impassive. Miller never took his eyes off Carolyn. "Let me refresh your memory. A plumber, Mr. Henderson, 64 years old, runs a small family business. You called us hysterical, claiming he'd stolen a diamond earring while fixing a leak under your sink. Said it was a family heirloom." He let the words hang in the air, heavy and sharp. "We searched him. We turned his van inside out. Found nothing. You were devastated." He was using her own word against her, dripping it with sarcasm. Caroline clutched the collar of her silk blouse, her knuckles white. "That was a misunderstanding. The earring turned up later." "It turned up later," Miller repeated, his tone flat. "After Mr. Henderson had been detained for 4 hours. After his photo was plastered all over the local newsfeed under the headline, 'Plumber arrested for theft in posh neighborhood.' His business almost went under. His wife had a panic attack so severe she had to be hospitalized. All for a misunderstanding." Evans held up his phone. On the screen was a mugshot of a kindly-looking gray-haired man, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. It was followed by a case summary. As Miller spoke, the pieces of a sickening puzzle began to fall into place. Carolyn wasn't just cheap. She was cruel. This was a pattern, a hobby, a way for her to wield her power over people she considered beneath her. "And what about the landscaper, Maria Flores?" Miller continued, his voice rising with controlled anger. "You claimed she deliberately poisoned your prized rose bushes, accused her of vandalism. We found out later you'd over-fertilized them yourself. But not before her work visa was put under review because of the official police report you filed." Every word was a hammer blow. Caroline was trembling now, her composure shattering like cheap glass. "Those were different situations. This man was threatening me," she shrieked, pointing a shaky finger back at me, a desperate final attempt to regain the narrative. "He did no such thing," Evans said calmly, not looking up from his phone. "The bodycam audio is perfectly clear. He asked to be paid the agreed-upon price. Your voice was calm until you dialed 911. Then the theatrics started." Miller took another step closer, invading her personal space. He was towering over her now. "You used my uniform, my badge, my time, as your personal little weapon. You think 911 is your private concierge service for bullying working people? You think you can ruin lives for sport and get away with it? His voice was a low roar now, echoing in the cavernous foyer. I felt a surge of vindication so powerful it was almost nauseating. The fear I had felt just minutes before was being replaced by a righteous fury on my behalf, channeled through this angry, disillusioned cop. "I'm a tax-paying citizen. You work for me," Caroline spat, her voice cracking with a mix of fear and indignation. "No, ma'am," Miller shot back. "I work for the law, a law you just broke. Filing a false police report is a crime, a serious one." He finally turned away from her and looked at me, his eyes filled with a weary sort of apology. "Sir, I am truly sorry for my initial assumption. You are free to go, and you will be paid, in full." He turned back to Caroline. "You will give this man the $400 you owe him, right now, in cash. Then you and I are going to have a long conversation about your history of making false accusations. You might want to call your lawyer." Caroline stared at him, her mouth agape. The power dynamic had been so completely inverted, she seemed unable to process it. She looked from Miller's furious face to Evan's stoic one, and finally to me. The hatred in her eyes was pure and undiluted. With a trembling hand, she snatched her purse from the side table, fumbled inside, and pulled out a thick wad of $100 bills. Not the prop singles from the envelope, but real money. She peeled off 4 crisp bills and practically threw them at me. They fluttered to the marble floor. I didn't bend to pick them up. I just looked at her, then looked at Miller. A strange cold calm settled over me. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the humiliation, the terror, the casual cruelty she had inflicted not just on me, but on who knows how many others. Miller nodded slowly, understanding my silence. He turned back to Caroline, a grim finality in his voice. "Pick it up," he ordered. "Pick it up and hand it to him. Properly." Hesitantly, as if the floor was on fire, she knelt down. Her designer dress pooled around her on the floor she had been so desperate to protect. As her manicured fingers gathered the bills, I saw Officer Evans glance down at his bodycam. He subtly adjusted his position, ensuring the camera had a perfect, unobstructed view of the wealthy, powerful Caroline, kneeling at the feet of the handyman she had tried to destroy. And that's when I noticed it. A tiny, almost imperceptible detail. Miller's hand, which had been resting near his hip, was no longer there. It was now resting on the grip of his service weapon. Not in a threatening way, but in a strange, possessive manner, as if he was drawing some sort of dark comfort from it. The look in his eyes had changed again. The professional anger was gone, replaced by something personal, something deeply unsettling. It was the look of a man who had seen this one too many times, a man whose fuse had just been completely burned away. With trembling hands, Caroline gathered the $400 bills from the floor. She rose, her face a mask of humiliation and fury, and shoved the money into my hand. Her touch was icy. I carefully folded the bills and placed them in my back pocket, the simple act feeling like the closing of a chapter. But the story wasn't over. The air in the room was still thick with a tension that had morphed into something new, something volatile. Miller hadn't moved. His hand remained on the grip of his pistol, his knuckles white. The look in his eyes was fixed on Caroline, and it was a look I'll never forget. It was the abyss staring back. "You think this is over?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You think you can just pay him off and this all goes away? The plumber, the landscaper. How many others, Caroline? How many decent people have you tried to crush just because you could?" "That's enough, Miller," Evans said sharply, taking a step forward. For the first time, his voice held a note of genuine alarm. "We have her. Filing a false report, possibly perjury. Let's take her in. By the book." "The book?" Miller laughed, a harsh, grating sound with no humor in it. "The book gives her a slap on the wrist, a fine she won't even notice. She'll hire a slick lawyer, and it'll all disappear. And next month she'll do it again. The book doesn't work for people like her." He took a step toward Caroline, and this time his hand tightened on his weapon. It wasn't a threat of violence, but a symbol of his rage, a physical manifestation of his utter contempt. It was in that terrifying moment that I understood. This wasn't just about Caroline anymore. For Miller, this was the culmination of years of frustration, of seeing the wealthy and connected play by a different set of rules. Caroline was just the final straw. He was on the edge, and she had pushed him over. "Sir, stand down," Evans commanded, his voice now steel. He unclipped his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Evans. I need a supervisor at this location. Non-emergency. Officer Miller is agitated." Miller flinched as if he'd been struck. The radio call broke the spell. He looked from Evans to me, and then back at Caroline, and the raw, dangerous fire in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a profound weariness. He slowly, deliberately removed his hand from his weapon. He looked defeated. He had seen justice within his grasp, a chance to truly make one of these people feel the consequences of their actions, and his own partner had taken it away, pulling him back into the world of procedures and paperwork that he felt had failed him and so many others. The supervisor arrived, and the rest was a blur of official procedure. Statements were taken. I recounted my story, this time to a sergeant who listened patiently, his eyes occasionally flicking toward the bodycam footage Evans had preserved. Caroline, now silent and sullen, was formally charged with filing a false police report. Miller was quiet, answering the sergeant's questions in clipped monosyllables. He was told to wait in his cruiser. As I was finally preparing to leave, Officer Evans caught me at the door. "Hey," he said, his expression serious. "I'm sorry for how that started, and for my partner's reaction." "You saved me," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "You believed me? Why?" He sighed, glancing back into the house where Caroline was being read her rights. "Let's just say I've seen this movie before. Different actors, same script, and I believe in watching the whole film before I decide who the villain is." He handed me a business card. "This has my direct line. The district attorney's office will be in touch. Your testimony, along with this footage, is going to be crucial. She's not getting away with a slap on the wrist. Not this time." Over the next few weeks, the story unfolded. The local news picked it up, but it wasn't the headline Caroline had envisioned. "Wealthy homeowner charged after falsely accusing contractor. Bodycam footage key." My company's name was mentioned in the most positive light possible. The DA, seeing a chance to make a public statement against the misuse of police resources, went after her hard. They dug into her past, and with the Henderson and Flores cases as evidence of a pattern, they built a case that was impossible to wriggle out of. The most shocking news came about a week later. Officer Miller was suspended indefinitely, pending an internal investigation. The official reason was conduct unbecoming an officer, citing his loss of professional composure and the unnerving gesture with his weapon. A part of me felt a pang of sadness for him. He had crossed a line, but he had done it because he was drowning in a sea of injustice he felt powerless to stop. He was a casualty of the same system that had created Caroline. In the end, Caroline took a plea deal to avoid a public trial. She received no jail time, but she was sentenced to 500 hours of community service working at a food bank in the poorest part of the city, and forced to pay hefty fines, as well as financial restitution to me, Mr. Henderson, and Maria Flores for the damages she'd caused. The day I received the check from her lawyer, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a quiet sense of balance restored. I paid my rent, and with the extra money, I invested in new equipment for my business, which was now busier than ever thanks to the news story. My real victory wasn't the money. It was the truth, captured in the unblinking green light of a body camera. A truth that finally, for once, was more powerful than a rich woman's lie.